Anyone ever witness or star in a dramatic quit firing at work? Before we get started, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and turn on the bell so you don't miss future videos. Thanks for the support. So I, 37 female, have only had 4 jobs in my life. Started working at 17, usually stayed a year or two, then was a sachem for a big chunk of my adult life. So my work drama experience is pretty limited. At my 2012 to 2014 job in a law office, I had a coworker, older woman, who bragged about quitting by flipping off the boss on her way out, and I was amazed. Meanwhile, every time I've quit, it's been painfully normal and undramatic. I've never been fired, low-key terrified I'd cry if it happened. The closest I came was when my boss tried to make me sign a write-up. I refused. He went from screaming, "You're just trying to get unemployment," to suddenly, "We're a family company. Let's work this out." Somehow that meeting ended with me negotiating later start times. Now at my current job as a social worker, my manager always has stories of people getting fired in spectacular ways. So humor a girl who's been home with kids way more than she planned. What's the most dramatic quit or firing you've ever seen or starred in? Crying, screaming, ranting, mic drops? I want all the stories. Next story. Back in the day where secretaries basically did everything in an office, we had an awesome lady who took care of pretty much everything personal and business for the 2 executives. They decided that they would bring in someone more attractive, younger, to replace her, but told her that she would be training the girl to be more of a junior secretary and assist her as needed. Fast forward about 2 months, and they fired the older secretary on a Friday afternoon after working many nights on a huge presentation. She went to her desk to collect her things and shredded the entire contents of her inbox, including several drafts with critical notes of the presentation. They were calling her all weekend to see where she had left the notes. She filed an age discrimination case, and they ended up settling with her. Not a lot of money, but we were all happy for her. Her departure wasn't really dramatic, but the after effect was epic. Next story. I was at an all-employee in-person meeting once, where someone got walked out in front of everyone. She'd worked there for a decade, and sent a scathing email to the entire company calling out every single, terrible flaw of senior leadership. She said what everyone was thinking, and was applauded on her way out. Next story. I've got the pictures to prove it, but here's my story. I worked at a retread plant. Basically, for truck tires and such, we just put new tread on bad tires. You check them for damage, patch holes, and send them down the line. My position was assistant plant manager, which basically just meant I was the foreman, manager for second shift. Pay was not what you'd expect given the title, but it wasn't terrible. I had worked in manufacturing before, and also led teams in other industries. I did not really get a lot of training, but it really wasn't a difficult job mentally. Physically, it was brutal. My team was all youngins in their early 20s, late teens. The guys on first shift, this was the only job they've ever had, and had been doing it on average over 25 years. As you'd expect, we got crap from first shift guys non-stop. Every single damn day it was something. Why did you only get this much done? This area was dirty. These should have been stacked here, not there, blah blah blah. Thing was, I ain't no idiot, nor am I a complete damn moron. Since my first shift alone, I took pictures of what we walked into every day, and also how we left it, and had a detailed report every night that I kept to myself and just whipped it out when questioned. We were also way understaffed. The odds were against us. My team busted their asses for me because I led by doing and helped everyone. For reference, first shift had at least 2 guys in each stations, whereas we only had 1. And again, we were all new to this crap, and the first shift was all lifers. This is where things start going south. I came in one morning 30 minutes early, as I always did. My best teammate on my shift also did this. I found him when I got there, and he was damn crying. Mind you, this kid was the best, and should have had my position. He was only 21, so maybe that's why he didn't get it. I get him to calm down and explain why he is so upset. Apparently, the first shift plant manager berated him, and he got dogpiled by the other guys as well, saying this or that wasn't done, these areas weren't cleaned, etc. Just all petty crap. I have him come with me to the other manager, and I immediately start yelling at the guys who gave him trash. They try their best, but I whip out my phone and say, "And here's the proof. You won't pull that crap on me." The reply was, "Okay, well then we will start taking pictures if you want to play that game." By all means, idiot. but it won't matter because I've been covering my ass and my team's ass. Then pulled out my notes in my phone with all the dates and what I had detailed to go with the pictures I had. So we go back and forth some more, and they give up because they simply had nothing. My teammate apologized to me after as he felt responsible for the whole thing, and I said, "Dude, it's not your fault. I knew this day would eventually come. That's why I kept documenting everything on my own. They just weren't prepared for me." At lunch, I tell everyone on the team what happened, and that I no longer expect them to continue busting their asses. We get what we can done, and if they won't hire help for us, then we just do the minimum. Keep your crap tidy, and I will handle the rest. The next day, HR calls, and I end up on the phone with them for about 2 hours. HR surprisingly was on my side and my team's. I had interviews with other companies the following week, so I didn't really care, but I did not want my team getting more screwed over after I left. Monday arrives, and I tell my team that I should be hearing back from another company, and this week would be my last. I thank them all for their hard work and offer to be a reference should they also want to leave. Tuesday morning before my shift, I got an offer and decide that today would be my last day. I go into work, and one of the douchebags is outside smoking, all smug and excited to see me. In a very asshole gotcha way, he tells me he's got pictures of something we didn't do. Lol. I look at them, and it was in fact something we left. But it was a pallet of crap that was left from first shift, of course, and not something in the scope of my responsibilities. Whatever. Last day, I am not getting into it. The juice. At lunch that evening, I gather my crew and thank them for everything. Tell them it's my last day, and inform them I won't just be quitting, but leaving a little gift for one particular damn idiot. They get all excited and question what I plan on doing. I had been messing around with the extrusion rubber and had filled a mechanic work glove we used to make it look as if a hand was in it giving the middle finger. At the end of the night, I swept up all the dirt to make the asshole's initials, placed the glove so it would stand at attention, then grabbed 2 small flags and stuck them in so they crossed each other. It was damn hilarious. I told my team to deny knowing anything and saying that they all left as I locked up alone. In truth, they helped me put it together. The next day I get a phone call from the other plant manager, and he started with, "So I guess you aren't coming in today, or anymore?" I said, "No, how'd you guess?" He said, "Well, because none of my guys got anything damn done today and refused to pick up what you left for them. They demanded something be done, questioning every hour what they intended on doing. Apparently it was an absolute nightmare, but the other manager found it hilarious." The kid they made cry? He messaged me that night and said, "You're my hero. Nobody has ever stuck up for me before. I got picked on in school, and I couldn't escape it as an adult no matter how hard I worked. You were the first and only person to care about a guy like me. I wish you the best luck." And I kept the glove and flags as a souvenir and made a little shrine in my room with it. Damn bullies and damn Goodyear. Next story. We had several over the years. Many of them involved the person in question being dragged out of the building in handcuffs by the state police. 1. A mid-level manager who was falsifying a female employee's overtime in exchange for dirty favors. When they arrested him and searched his office, they also discovered that he was taking bribes from people who our state agency was regulating. 2. A guy who was using our state-provided work computers and network to browse CP. During that investigation, it also came out that he had been physically abusing his mail-order bride and that he had lied about his qualifications on his employment application. 3. A guy who had filed a frivolous lawsuit against a nearby McDonald's and was using our state agency letterhead in threat letters to imply that he could somehow bring down regulatory consequences to them if they did not settle. 4. A guy who was using state-provided computer resources to run his own dirty site. 5. A guy who was known as the Sweater Bandit. He was taking sweaters that female coworkers kept in their cubicles and then pleasure into them in the bathroom. He would then return the sweaters to the cubicles of the owners. He was caught when video surveillance was set up. Next story. About 25 years ago, I worked as a server in the penthouse of a nice hotel. One of my coworkers served a party from Europe, and I guess they don't typically tip in their country, and left a handful of change on a $500 bill. He followed them to the elevator, and as the door was closing, he fired all the change into the elevator and yelled, "You forgot your change!" He was fired. Next story. I gave my boss at a very large telecom company 1 week's notice. He pouted and had all my access completely shut off. I spent the next week giving word-by-word instructions to a poor coworker who didn't know the programming language, much less the operating system the app was written in. I was the sole person there who did. I guess he really showed me, huh? Next story. I was taking accounting and business classes and became more qualified for my boss's job than she was. She was supposed to be reviewing the contract activity to make sure workload was fairly distributed among 23 or so employees. You hear whispers when people are bored because they get worried about layoffs. I was always swamped. One other lady was always swamped. The report the boss was taught to pull was horrifically slow, massive, and would print to paper. She had said something to me that told me she was waiting for folks to speak up and believed they all had reasonable workloads because they didn't. When I said that was a quantifiable statement, she got very pissy. The source data for that report can pull into Excel. I did my own analysis and found some folks only had 1 or 2 tasks a week, where Lady and I had 30 or more tasks. In a department of 23, I found no surprises. The people I saw as being busy had a moderate workload, and the people who were trying to look busy had almost none. I wrote up my findings in an email to my boss and her boss. I was noticeably livid, even by text. Hit send after close of business and cleaned out my desk because I knew this wouldn't end well the next morning. They did terminate me effective immediately. Then when I walked back to get my things from my cube, the manager walked into her own office instead of minding me. She was so stupid. So I sent my analysis to the whole department before I walked out the door. Next story. After being insulted and berated by my manager, an SVP mind you, who should have conducted herself much better, said, "Okay, here's a solution to your problem with me. Please accept my resignation and get lost." And that was that. I've never done anything like that before, but I'm 62 and have absolutely had it with these mean-spirited, arrogant, crazy idiots. It took a toll on me, but I stand by what I did and actually ended up getting an apology from her boss, an exec. Next story. I once sent a singing telegram to a colleague on her last day after being secretly fired. She was a competent and well-respected professional. The company knew folks would be angry if they knew she was fired for not kissing ass as vigorously as the executives wanted. The singer wrote a custom tune to ensure everyone knew who it was from. I had left a few months before and gave her a congratulatory balloon. Next story. Sadly, yes. It's painfully embarrassing. We had a layoff, and someone wasn't taking it well. Let's call him Brian. Brian was our only Mac expert for our software, which had a Windows and a Mac version. He was the go-to guy, and he was a little on the spectrum, but he was skilled when it came to Macs. But he got laid off because, again, management didn't really know his value. Well, he was going along with the layoff, like he was packing his stuff and grumbling about it, but moving along. The entire layoff was a crap show. We lost about 20% of our office that day. Well, some armed guards started rushing Brian along. Not angry-like, but, "Come on, stop talking to people, finish packing up." At some point, Brian damn snapped. "Back off, okay?" In that desperate voice an unstable gunman might have. "I have been here 5 years. I have a lot of stuff." The guard, with the diplomacy skills of someone who saw too many Dirty Harry movies, grabbed Brian's arm and shouted, "Hurry it up, or I will remove you without your things, friend. Stop touching me. I am not your friend." So the guard let go of him, speed walked away, and came back with a second guard. Both of them just grabbed Brian and started hauling Brian away like cops abusing sit-down protesters. Brain flailed and grabbed onto anything and everything. Chairs, cubicle walls, and some power cords. Things were falling over everywhere. The guards carried him off like a surfboard, and at some point, ungrabbed one of Brian's arms, because Brian started hitting them and screaming. Then, as they hauled him off, "He's breaking my arm! Oh my God, I am in so much pain! It's broken! Let me go! Let me go!" And started this hysterical sobbing and screaming. I mean, nobody was the good guy here. I have no idea if the guards were breaking his arm or Brian was just shouting stuff. It could have been handled better by both parties. It really made things worse for everyone. One woman broke down into hysterical sobbing, and they dragged her off by her arms dragging on the floor, and another stood on a table, acting like Sally Field and Norma Ray, giving some speech about he was the lucky one, and we were all sheep. They hauled him away too, although he was allowed to walk with them instead of dragging him. That was my first experience with an American layoff. So damn traumatic. Thankfully, none have been quite so dramatic as that one. Next story. A few months after an outstanding review, the CEO and attorney showed up and said they no longer had confidence in my leadership, whatever the hell that means. No reasons given. I am in an at-will state. They wanted me to pack up and go quietly at end of day to save me embarrassment. Instead, I made them both walk me out the front door in front of everyone. Told them they weren't going to get off easy. They offered only 2 weeks severance. But little did they know, I had scheduled a surgery and was approved for FMLA. So what they did to me was illegal, and I was educated in HR law. Next day, a letter came to them from my attorney. I ended up with full benefits and pay for 8 months, enough to recover and find another job. Now I wished I had sued them in federal court. I still think someone set me up. I still don't know why. Next story. I worked at a pizza place in North Philly as the cashier. The one owner got into an argument with a black guy and started yelling slurs. I chimed in and yelled that he should get lost. He yelled, "Get out, you're fired." I said, "No problem." Then I hopped over the counter and told him to get lost, and that was it. Next story. Nothing too crazy, but I dramatically walked off a job mid-shift. It was in the middle of COVID, and I took a job at a grocery store paying $12 per hour. They like to schedule people for 6-hour shifts with one 15-minute break and no lunch break, which was against provincial labor laws. I called them out on it, and they said it's store policy, and the union was okay with it, etc. I came to find out via the labor standards hotline that it didn't really matter if they were okay with it, it was still illegal. My next shift, I confronted them, and they still wouldn't budge, so I told them I was just going to leave. They did kind of follow me upstairs and gently talk me down, but I just handed in my key card and vest and left. I knew that someone else would pay me $12 per hour without risking knee injury or plantar fasciitis. I wasn't wrong. I've never regretted it. Next story. Not super dramatic, but a much-loved workplace had become very dysfunctional, and there were hostile takeovers of different groups as a result of a power vacuum. Owner left daily operations for a different endeavor. What's worse, the new shot callers had no idea how to project manage, and we literally had to fight with them to get work done. A smooth-running facility became a crap storm. I had announced my intent to leave, and they wanted an official resignation letter. So I wrote a 7-page essay about all the problems going on, named names and events, and circulated it by email to friends in different departments and locations over the company before sending it to HR. I started an exodus of programmers, after which a management consulting company had to be hired to address some of the issues in my resignation letter. Some of the nastier power players were prevented from taking over other groups as a result. I was kept posted on the news by coworker friends who stayed. Next story. Some of the more memorable ones. Guy got in a fight. I had to get another manager and security involved in removing him from the premises. A guy gave me a sympathy card as his 2-week notice. Notices get digitally saved in company records, so somewhere on a server there is a scan of this sympathy card. Had a guy on another shift so disgruntled with his manager that he came in on my shift to quit to me instead of his manager. Had a manager that was getting a bit older and his mind started slipping. He would announce in meetings he was the facilities manager. He wasn't. After grossly mismanaging his department, he was let go. He packed up his desk and was escorted out the door. The next day showed back up at security, stating he lost his badge, and was genuinely shocked when they told him he no longer worked there. In my early management career, I had a new hire that struggled with menial tasks. I grabbed a more experienced manager and we pulled him to the side to let him go before his 90-day probation was up. Dude started crying. Not like a few tears, full-on sobbing. Had a guy that was getting high at work. I actually called HR in to deal with this one. They sent him home and he crashed into a parked car in the parking lot. I got a call from security to bring a guy to the security office. I figured it was an issue with his badge, so I said I'd send him up. They said no, I needed to bring him up myself, so I did. There were 4 cops waiting for him there. He got carried off, and we never heard from him again. Found out he had beaten his wife before leaving for work. One job I quit? I programmed a time bomb into a couple machines. I found a picture of my boss drunk at a wedding on his wife's Facebook. I programmed it to pop up on the touchscreen 3 months after I left. I heard from my old workmates it was funny when the first one popped up and he had a meltdown. But when the second one went off a week later, he lost his trash. He hired a guy to comb through every machine's program and make sure there weren't any more. Next story, had one many years ago. Coworker constantly late for work. Sat at his desk doing chaw all day with a spit cup nearby. This was a professional office with business casual decorum. Disappeared for a couple hours during lunch every day. My boss knew him from another job. Seemed like a decent guy, but something was just off. One day, he no-shows for work. I'm sitting in my boss's office. Building is in a commercial office area of town, no residential homes within a mile or so, and they were upper middle class homes in country clubs. We're chatting about something and some dude, obviously out of place dude, walks by in the parking lot. Disheveled, hadn't showered in days, kinda confused guy. He stops. He's loitering for a while, just randomly wandering the parking lot, like he's looking for something but not trying to look. So we start watching him. Stands in the middle of the parking lot in view of the admin assistant's window, pulls his wallet out, looks at it, drops it on the ground, bends over at the waist, stares at it, opens it up on the ground, stares at it some more, wanders around, and is very obviously high as a MFer. After a while, like 2 minutes, he picks up the wallet, looks around, specifically at our office, loiters a little bit more, and disappears. Come to find out, the dude was there to make a buy for substances off my coworker who no-showed that day. He'd been dealing narcotics in the parking lot at random times during the day. Next day, he shows up to work 3 hours late. Apparently found out after the fact he was doing and dealing substances. Anyway, my boss brings him into the director's office and they let him go. You could hear the "dude, really?" from the guy. They walked him out and that was that. Next story. Ours was a slow burn. We had a know-it-all type of guy who was actually really nice to me. He was a few levels above me, but I sat near his cubicle. He and another employee got into a disagreement over a statement made about a very important government official. The know-it-all argued politely that this was a direct threat, and that the Secret Service could be called in to investigate. Sure enough, I see 2 guys in dark suits walking through our office. Know-it-all had apparently called in the U.S. Secret Service. Know-it-all was a marked man after this. Management was just looking for a reason to fire him. One day, he got into a heated argument with a female coworker and called her a semen receptacle. That was it. Next story. We had a guy get fired and he got violent and refused to leave, so the cops were called, and this guy proceeded to throw punches at the cops. He was arrested and we never saw him again. Next story. My first full-time office job after high school, the girl who trained me for my job taught me to do things wrong because her friend had wanted the job, but I got it. I'm a smart person and couldn't figure out why mistakes were constantly being brought to my attention when I was doing things the exact way I was told to. Someone finally clued me in that this girl was talking bad about me to everyone and had admitted to her that she was sabotaging me so her friend would be hired. I was young and hot-headed, so the next time I walked into the office, I saw her look at me and start whispering to someone, and I snapped. I yelled at her right there in the middle of the cube farm. "You got something to say? Let's go, let's hear it. I'll kick your ass." Manager immediately pulled me into the office and fired me. I cried and said, "But it's my birthday." Lol. It was my 19th birthday, like I said. I was young, but Carrie, if you're reading this, you're still an idiot. Next story. The worst I ever did was threaten to quit and take my diploma down off the wall. I had to keep coming in for a few weeks though. I'm in the Army and can't actually quit. I did tell them that I didn't want my temp orders renewed again, and they didn't believe me until it came down to it. But they didn't process my papers for a month, so I got an extra month of payment, which was appreciated. They thought they were using up my vacation time, but I also got to keep that too. Next story. I was doing an internship at a local office of a national nonprofit organization. There was about 6 or 7 employees. After about a month, I heard some rumblings that the VP was having real problems with drinking. Then I noticed a couple times he had alcohol on his breath after coming back from lunch. The big day was when the VP came back from lunch completely drunk, like staggering. Someone tipped off the president, and he came out of his office in time to see the VP trying to get to the restroom while holding onto the wall. The president starts to yell, which was quite loud in a kind of small office. "We talked about this, Bob. You're drunk again. I warned you." Bob says, "I'm not drunk." I stick my head back out into the hall to see, although I knew I should not. Bob says, "I'm not drunk again." The president unleashed a powerful right hook to Bob's face, and Bob slumped to the floor after letting out a, "Ugh." Now more people stick their heads out to see what the noise was, in time to see the growing wet spot on the front of Bob's pants, as Bob remained motionless. Bob didn't work there anymore after that. It was a real shocker for me as a college student to see that happen. Next story. We had one where the worker destroyed the construction job they were working on before the PM could get to the site and escort him away. It scared the customer. It scared me. He was not pleased with fines the owner took from his check. And since I issue checks, His anger was directed towards me. For weeks after, everyone was on eggshells, thinking he might come back and beat us all. He was already divorced, lost access to his kids, and living in a tent in the woods as some form of sovereign citizen. Dude had nothing left to lose. Next story. My company changed the comp plan, and it was a pretty big hit. I had only been there like 6 weeks, so I didn't really care that much. An old vet saw his last big commission hit his bank account and then immediately sent in his resignation to the entire company. This was a company of a couple hundred people, and the CEO replied all, dropping F-bombs and going insane on the guy for leaving. Next story. Former boss couldn't stand this employee and his wife. They both worked at our spa and caused issues. Employee thought he was invincible. Dude gets another job and gloated, giving his 2 weeks. Gave all of his thoughts, gripes, suggestions. That couple was not made of money. Boss told him she didn't need his 2 weeks. He was done after that day. He was livid. Wife was pissed and quit soon thereafter. Next story. My boss and his boss tried to prank me once after I had applied for an internal promotion. So my boss called me in his office and started telling me all the reasons I was not qualified for a transfer, and basically attacking my character. I got mad and told him, "Damn you and this job," and tried to walk out. His boss was standing outside with the rest of my team with a cake. It was awful. I cried and apologized a lot. Next story. Imam, not sure how dramatic it was. Back almost 30 years ago, my company decided to move out of NYC and to upstate NY. They told me flat out that they were not bringing me with them. It would be cheaper to just hire someone from the local area, then pay any relocation costs. But they did ask me to spend 2 weeks going up to the new office to help coordinate finalizing the rental agreement, packing everything up, hiring movers, and unpacking the IT stuff and getting it all settled. They said I would be well compensated for the additional time and cost, 3 additional hours of travel, and $12 per day in train fees. I should have asked for a specific number, but I was young and trusting and also worried about my next job. I would have 0 time to interview or even send out resumes. At the end of the move, in front of the whole staff, my boss gives me my final paycheck and a crisp $100 bill. My pay was the same as usual, so his understanding of well compensated was $100. I am an introvert who is not very assertive, but man, I let loose. I was like, "Are you kidding me? All that time on the train and the cost, and I get $100? Are you joking?" And then I walked out, calling me a cheap idiot in front of everyone. 2 weeks later, I get a check from him for my normal pay. I'm a bit confused, but think that maybe he came around and realized it wasn't right to take advantage of me. I need the money and cash it. Then a month later, I get a letter from him stating that my replacement accidentally sent out a new payroll check to me because I had not been removed from the system. He would appreciate that the $350 be returned to me ASAP by carrier check and FedEx. I just tossed his letter in the trash and moved on. 2 more letters came, but I tossed them unopened. Next story. Our company had been bought by a former competitor. The warehouse manager was an abusive jerk who resented the new owners, and they clearly didn't like him, so he took it out on his staff, one young guy in particular. Finally, he pushed this kid too far, so the kid dropped what was in his hands and punched the warehouse manager so hard he knocked him out cold. Then he calmly stepped over the prone WM and walked out. We were all in shock. I don't condone violence ever, but the WM definitely was asking for a confrontation. Next story. My industry has been hit hard since COVID. I've been laid off consecutively each year since 2020. No, not performance, personality related. I give myself a day to sulk and cry, and then the following day, I'm back up on the horse, reapplying. Your job does not represent who you are as a person. Never be loyal, and if a better opportunity arises, take it. Next story. Once had someone tell me to get lost in the middle of a team meeting, then storm out and quit on the spot. This was in front of about 20 people. They were fairly new to the team and trying to push their idea of the right way to do something, except we'd already tried that approach before and found that it didn't work. They started putting people on the spot to get them to side with her, which was clearly making everyone uncomfortable, and she wasn't taking their opinions about it on board. After she said her spiel, I told her that we'd discuss it afterwards because we had a tight agenda to get through. Apparently she didn't like that, shouted at me to get lost myself and walked out. Thing is, she clearly expected the whole room to back her up, but not a single person did. She wasn't well liked to begin with, while I'd spent 5 to 6 years building that team and had been with the company close to a decade. Within 5 minutes of her storming out, I had 7 emails in my inbox from people writing witness statements without me even asking. She emailed her resignation right afterwards, which I accepted immediately and looped HR into. 10 minutes later, she tried to backpedal and rescind it with HR. Thankfully, our HR manager just told her flat out, "Maybe don't tell your manager to get lost in future." Turns out a number of team members had already updated HR on what went down. Next story. I stumbled on a 3-year, $115,000 embezzlement scheme by a coworker who I despised. Reported to boss and law enforcement, she was fired almost immediately, and I ultimately prepared the technical affidavit for the U.S. attorney to present to the federal grand jury to indict her. I also testified at her sentencing hearing when she pleaded guilty to grand theft and mail fraud. She didn't get nearly as much time in prison as she should have, but at least the skank was gone. And her bully of an older sister, who made everyone's life hell for trying to get the useless POS to do her job, was so humiliated that she requested a transfer and fled the state. So double win. Next story. My most dramatic was a months-long ordeal created by upper management. It's a long story, but it's so full of drama that it's worth it if you like that kind of stuff. I was the manager of a wine gift shop at a Renaissance fair and was overworked, overstressed, and had no help in the store. To start, I was salaried at $27,500 with no benefits and worked 40 to 60 hours a week. Thankfully, I had insurance through the healthcare marketplace because I ended up needing to use it a lot. I had been ill for a month and started having panic attacks. I didn't know that's what was happening the first time and thought I was having an asthma attack. I do have asthma, but mine is exercise-induced, and I had never had an asthma attack. During my first panic attack, I lost feeling in my arms, which of course freaked me out more. I struggled to breathe and then passed out. My assistant manager had quit not long after I was promoted. She wanted the job and I got it instead, and I had to wait months for an employee to return from a church retreat to have a new assistant. She was a seasonal employee who was really good, so we were all in agreement that she was going to be promoted when she returned from her 6-month trip. I just had to wait another month or two, I can't remember, for her to come back. When she returned, I had an assistant manager again, and I felt my stress start to decrease. I finally started to get over my illness and was feeling better about my job. Then my boss told me they were taking my assistant manager to work upstairs in the offices, leaving me with no help again. I was so pissed that I actually had tunnel vision. He later told me that my face turned so red when he told me this news that he thought, oh crap. My boss had hired this kid he knew from another job to work in the store and decided he was going to be the new assistant manager, even though I wasn't sure yet. My boss was the previous manager and just could not let the position go and could not let me do things my way. I eventually agreed and started training this kid. Then I came in one day to find this kid, okay, he was probably 20, eating cereal at my desk. Wine shop management shared a desk, but still, I suspected then that my boss was trying to replace me. I was in the wine shop alone when I started to feel weird. Tightness in my chest and like a rubber band around my left arm. I thought I was having a heart attack, so I called for an ambulance. This would be my 3rd trip to the ER via ambulance in just 3 months. I had them take me to another hospital. My job was on the county line, because I hadn't been able to get answers at the hospital closest to my house. They ran all kinds of tests but found nothing. Meanwhile, my mom joined me, and we started to realize that it was work stress. My job was killing me. I went back and told my boss, then officially gave my notice the next day, a Thursday. On Friday, I was a mess. I mostly cried in my office because I didn't want to leave my job, but mostly because I was mentally beaten down and couldn't think straight. Then the owner's wife came to my office at the end of the day to convince me to quit then and there. I disagreed, knowing that I needed to work through it in order to recover, and I had no doubt that I would because I already felt less stressed. But I realized that she was not going to let me continue to work, and she was not going to fire me. I gathered up my stuff in a box and left the store in tears. I was so upset that I was suicidal that night. They had overworked me until I broke, and then tossed me away like I was trash. My brother, who was staying with us, it was just my mom and me back then, was so distraught over seeing me that way that he thought about going to my job and punching my boss, but he figured that everyone would be gone by the time he got there. My boss had been my closest friend. We bonded before he was promoted, and he had not talked to me at all that day, which was extremely odd. The next day, my anger had taken over. I took my work shirts to return them, and my boss quickly left the building when I showed up. It was obvious to me that he felt guilty over me nearly working myself to death, and his solution was to flee. I had not blamed him, but at that point, I realized he was the reason, though I still think it's because of the pressure the owners put on him. But he had become someone different, a tool who did the owner's bidding and kissed his ass. I had the respect of the owner because I stood my ground and provided new ideas, but my boss was desperate for their approval and did anything the owner's wife wanted. I would wake up crying in the middle of the night for months after and had nightmares for years. My then fiancé was concerned about my mental health and hated that he lived over an hour away, so I started going back to his place. He lived with his parents, just to be with him. I just needed time to recover. I later learned that I actually suffered PTSD from that job. I started to write to work through it, creating a fictional pirate story that somewhat mirrored my experience, serving as a sort of metaphor for what I went through. I later self-published that story as my first book, Pirate Ophelia. Sometime after, I was treated for Lyme disease, which I likely got at that job. It was probably the illness I had for a month and just did not catch the rash. It's also likely why I started having panic attacks, though I definitely was overworked. I have never been the same. I took a job with Joann Fabrics 3 months later and used my management experience to get a promotion to store manager within 7 months. It definitely paid more and provided benefits, but it wasn't the same, and it never felt like my home like my wine shop did. Honestly, I hated Joann from the beginning, but it paid the bills, and I needed to prove to myself that I could be a manager again. Next story. I used to work at a construction company with multiple trades. More than once, we had people who were termed because the cops grabbed them in the parking lot, and they weren't going to be available for an extended period of time. One had a company truck and was going on to a military base and had his weed sitting on the passenger seat. He was detained for a while. Office staff they managed to keep pretty well low-key, except for one of our dispatchers who failed a random drug test. She had shown up drunk like 2 or 3 days in a row, not had a beer for breakfast or hung over, but doing shots hours before coming in. Next story. I was part of one that sounded exactly like a story everyone on here would mock. It had yelling, it had clapping, it had a security escort, all of that. Next story. A guy at my previous company had scheduled an email to be sent out to everyone during a meeting he had with the upper management. Basically detailed how awful this company was, how they screwed over their workers, that he had another job and was leaving that day with no notice. Then he walked out. When I found out they were making me redundant, after a demotion 2 days before Christmas, I had a million different ideas on my big exit. Ultimately, I chickened out, but I did get my revenge. On my final day, I requested a meeting with the CEO. I knew she wouldn't care, but I laid out some pretty shady stuff that had been happening and didn't hold back. Then came my exit interview with HR, told him how terrible my boss was, and that she had been lying about our monthly meetings. These didn't happen, and he should ask to see the minutes. It was satisfying knowing they would receive this feedback. As my final revenge, for our last night, I took my staff and clients out for dinner, let them buy whatever they wanted using the company card. I didn't request a receipt, as it was my boss's job to handle receipts and cash logs, a job she had fobbed off to me. Knowing they would be freaking out and she would show her incompetence by not knowing how to handle it was satisfaction enough. Next story. This was very quiet, but here you go. Employer laid off 18 people in one day. I was in the middle of training a group of employees on a computer system, got called in, laid off, told to empty my desk and be gone. Mind you, I had seen this coming and had been moving my stuff home for the last month. I was, if anything, relieved to be gone. Went back to tell the trainees they were on their own and best of luck. While I was packing up my coffee mug and sweater, the gentleman in the cube across from mine was on the phone with a customer who was having problems with his software. The hatchet man came by and told him he was laid off. He got back on his phone and said, "I can't help you. I have just been laid off." "No, nobody else here supports that program. I suggest you take your business to a better provider." Next story. I worked at a law firm where they had hired someone who was, unknown to them, a raging alcoholic. She and another secretary got into a screaming match, and I thought they would start swinging at each other. The lady who was obviously drunk was walked out. Another person who was found to have embezzled almost $1 million was abruptly walked out. At first, nobody knew why. But my office was located next to the CFO's office, and I asked him what had happened, and he told me. Most of her coworkers by that time knew why, and it wouldn't surprise me if one of them didn't blow the whistle. Next story. This was a lifetime ago, but I watched 2 coworkers get walked out in handcuffs. I was an overnight cashier at Walmart, and these 2 were customer service managers. One of their main tasks was pulling the daytime tills and then replacing them. I don't know how they did it, but they were stealing cash while doing this. Management was smart about it. Let them continue enough to build a rock-solid case against them with full felony charges due to the amount stolen. Next story. Not dramatic, but definitely bizarre. I was sick, in the hospital, when a coworker called to tell me that a woman was fired. She wasn't doing anything during the day but sleeping at her desk. So a few weeks later, I come back to work and I see her sitting at her desk. So I asked my coworker who gave me the news, and she told me the owners felt bad for her and told her she could use her office computer to look for a new job. That this way, it would appear she wasn't fired but looking for a new job. Well, she sold a project, and as a freelancer, had the company supply support. Then she sold another project. 6 months later, she was officially rehired. Never seen someone refuse to leave and end up getting hired back. Next story. I was a restaurant manager, working for a national corporate chain that used to be top-notch before they got greedy and overextended themselves. I took a step down to AM to learn their ropes, then was promoted. 3 days later, during a busy dinner rush, the regional manager came in to tell me they decided to go in a different direction, aka someone cheaper with less experience, and they'd like me to show him the ropes. So I said I needed a minute to get my emotions under control. I said some other things too, but that's not relevant. I went to the office, wiped the computer, threw all fiscal and marketing stuff into a box, left my keys on the desk, and walked out the back door. It felt amazing. Next story. I had a coworker who was an absolute bully take a picture of our then supervisor coming in on the very day he would be fired. She may have played a part in him getting fired, then made a whole obituary right up with the picture, then taped it in his locker. It was pretty wild. The pic was taken from like a sky bridge section of the hospital that overlooked the loading docks. Didn't even get reprimanded for it. Next story. I once resigned on spot with a letter that I wrote upon an elastic band stretched over my keyboard rest. Once back at normal size, it was the smallest font resignation you had ever seen. Apparently, it was on the wall in HR for years. I felt like I was working for people fit for a rubber room, so I made sure to communicate in their language. Next story. Starred. Worked a customer service job answering phones, which I had done off and on for years. I was about 40, and getting old for it. Also dealing with younger staff who didn't want to do their job, which was answering telephones. I was getting sick of carrying the place and dealing with inept management. One Friday in the summer, customer calls up saying their service wasn't working. It wasn't utility, more like business or software expense. I look into it, and it was shut off non-payment. For months! They just realized now it wasn't working. I explained this to the caller, who demanded it be restored ASAP. Not only was it shut off, it was sent to collections for being past due. The way the back end worked there was no way it could go back on same day. She began yelling, etc. And again I explained it was shut off non-payment. She screams about how it's their busiest weekend of the summer, 4th of July, and needs it now. I respond, "You're not getting it now. Fastest is probably 3 to 5 days. I think she called me stupid or something, and that I don't understand business, etc. Basically belittling me as some phone queue loser. I basically said something like, "You know what? Get lost." Threw my headset down and said, "I'm done with this." A coworker, not quite a supervisor, but he was always pretty cool, came over and said very professionally, "What's going on right now?" I said, "I can't damn deal with this crap." She's shut off non-payment, screaming at me like it's my fault, calling me damn stupid. He looks down and my headset on the floor and asks, "Is this a live call we have right now?" I said, "Yeah, probably," and just walked away. I left, went outside for a few minutes, tempted to drive off into the sunset, but turned around and went upstairs. A supervisor who was a total phony, my age, but never worked the phones, invented his own new role from day one, and never took escalated calls, approaches me and says, "Come here." I kinda said no, but eventually followed him. He walks me into the manager's office, who herself was inept and had no concept of how terrible the entire company, let alone department, was run. She was nice though, just asked, "What happened?" I explained my story and that I'm sick of it. The place sucks. The customers are bottom of the barrel cheapskates. We were a very low-cost solution, lower quality, promising cheap promos. Then management claimed it was our fault for the high cancellation rate once prices went up to normal, etc. She says how this cannot happen. Then the lame supervisor adds, "Yeah, you can't be acting like that on the phones." I looked at him in disgust, said, "Yeah, how many phone calls have you taken since you've been here?" He replies, "That's not the issue." I paused, looked back at him, stood up and said, "No, that is the issue," and walked out. I went back outside, got in my car, and drove off. Admittedly, after a mile or two, I turned around, thinking maybe I could just say I was on my lunch break, but said screw it, and turned back around and drove home. Got an email later that day from HR saying I was terminated. I guess I should have been proactive and sent an email with a letter of resignation first, but oh well. Next story. I worked at a bank in a very wealthy area in California. Our customers were ridiculous. Not only were many of them rude, they were collectively very cheap. I had given my 2 weeks notice, and it was my last day. One of our more obnoxious customers came to my window and asked me to balance her account to her statement. She did this every month and would freak out if you were off by a penny. The thing is, she had a tendency to write things down wrong, so everyone was always off until they printed all the most recent transactions and explained her mistakes. Anyway, as usual, I was off on the first go-round, and she began berating me. I was off by 23 cents, so I pulled a quarter out my cash drawer, told her to keep the change, and closed my window. I waved to her as I walked out the door. Next story. My first big girl job out of college was pushing papers in a bank's mortgage department. Well, as economic slowdowns occur in that world, 4 of us in the department got laid off, me being one of them. But one of us got fired for a whole lot of reasons. A lot of rude disrespect for everyone being top of the list. It was her only career experience, that job. 20 plus years there. I wasn't there on her firing date because I had a funeral, but she threw a heavy glass paperweight at the president in his office. He was a super nice guy, BTW. I'd hate to burn my bridge there in her shoes. Next story. Not a permanent job, but we were running a week-long evaluation course for adult sailing instructors. Pretty rigorous. Lots of 25-foot boats, single-handing, heavy weather. One instructor would just wander off at the most random moments, ran aground, literally sailed off into the sunset before we chased her down. We eventually figured out she was high as a kite and had a long-term prescription for opioids, which she hadn't bothered to tell us. We walked her out. Next story. Well, I was on the phone with a client when one of her coworkers hit their nonsense limit. She stood up, told everyone exactly how she felt about it, at the top of her lungs, grabbed her stuff, and walked out. Their customers were known for being difficult, but we just listened until she was done, and client restarted our conversation with, "Well, looks like we're hiring." Next story. I got called into a meeting on my day off and knew I was going to get fired, so I showed up wearing an Adult Sites 2 shirt and then stole a ton of stationery and the company embosser on the way out. They are no longer in business. Next story. I worked for a place for 3 months running their closed captioning department. They created the role for me and promised to train me on their very obscure system. When I got there, though, my manager told me to look on YouTube and never showed me anything. I had coworkers literally ask me what I even did there, and I had no idea how to answer them. He also didn't order me headphones, so I had to use my own. As a captions, who sat right next to the office coffee maker, he finally gave me really nice headphones on a Thursday, and on the Monday, 2 days before the Christmas party, and before I'd had a chance to eat my lunch, he called me into an office with HR and laid me off. The stuff I've written was just the big stuff. There was loads of small stuff, and I'd already started looking for work again, but I was still really pissed. I kind of blacked out for a second and curtsied at the door while thanking him for the opportunity. I was wearing a dress that just flared out and made it even more dramatic than it had been in my head. Ugh. Damn those guys and their awful cartoons that don't sell to real broadcasters in real markets anyway. Next story. Had a guy at a call center. Very quiet and shy. He was off one day and someone wanted a number for one of his customers and looked in his notebook. It was filled with drawings of him killing people from the office. Really graphic, disturbing stuff. When he came back, they had loads of security outside the room for his firing. He seemed super angry, but security got him out. Next story. I was once on a company-wide call at a Fortune 500 company, and mid-call, the CEO announced they were laying off an entire division. Until then, nobody in the division knew they were losing their jobs. So tacky. Next story. We had a gentleman be fired, and while being angrily escorted out, he insisted on walking around the office and loudly saying, "Thank you," to everyone and shaking our hands. Another time, my supervisor and I, team lead, sat down with an employee that we thought was unhappy, and we were trying to figure out how to make him more comfortable. He got up mid-meeting and proclaimed, "Thank you for the opportunity," grabbed his stuff, and left. We think he thought he was being fired, and later found out he was schizophrenic. He also tried to rehire himself a couple weeks later by calling HR at the corporate office and telling them that my supervisor had said they needed to put him back on the payroll. Side story, we read about him months later being arrested for throwing a newspaper box through the windows at the David Letterman studios. Next story, I once quit a retail job in my early 20s that I actually enjoyed, but I was moving. Anyway, gave my 2 weeks notice, and they had me work right up to my last day, which is pretty normal. But they had me close the store, by myself, on my last shift. Hours were posted till 9, or maybe 10 p.m., I don't clearly remember. Manager went home at 4, I stayed open until 5, locked the doors, closed all the tills, etc., shut off the lights, armed the alarm, left, locked the door, and turned around and pushed my keys through the mail slot and went home. About an hour and a half later, the manager called me and said something to the effect of, "What the heck? You can't close the store early. Get back there." I said, "Not a chance." "What are you gonna do? Fire me?" Then hung up on her. I kind of feel bad, but also, why would you do that? Next story. 25 years ago, I was part of a US consulting team working for a Canadian bank in Toronto. The client was a marketing VP. One morning, for reasons I will never know, she got agitated, and then went into a full-scale screaming meltdown, the likes of which I never saw before. She berated the PM inches from his face. She fired our entire team on the spot, demanded we exit the premises, which we did. The project was over then and there, and we all flew back home. I had presented to her weeks earlier, and she was warm, friendly, intelligent, and innovative at the time, so this was quite shocking. It was abnormal. I found out that shortly thereafter, her team went to HR and demanded she be relieved of her duties. She was. I lost a gig, but felt terribly sorry for her. Next story. One day at work, many years ago, we saw a fine, upstanding employee being fired. On his knees, tears streaming down his face, begging for his job. He was not told the reason for his dismissal. He was told that his transfer from our parent institution didn't work out because of budget. Internally, we quickly found out he had been accused of harassment by a young woman, a contractor. He was one of those people that your immediate reaction was, "No way." Months went by before it was discovered that this young lady had actually stolen company assets, a vehicle, and this man discovered the theft. He was going to out her. We got her fired. Next story. When I finally walked away from corporate hell, I did so in fashion. I was in a rough patch of life and had taken a promotion with a new team. The CFO recommended me for the position. The manager was the worst human I had ever encountered. And that's saying a lot. I challenged her a lot, and she hated that all of her bosses knew me from previous projects. Anyway, I went out on leave. While handling my life, I decided that I didn't want to go back, but felt awful for my team being stuck with her. I summoned the HR gods. In the end, I resigned. They wouldn't accept it. Asked me to come back? No shot. They reduced my position, and that allowed for my 20-plus year severance to be paid out. She was removed from her position, put on a special project for 6 months. Then they served her walking papers. She was let go. My old team sent me flowers. No regrets. Damn that her. Next story. I worked for a small US company that went all in on a project overseas for British Gas. We developed and installed a huge test system for wireless meter reading. Results looked good, but then British Gas reorganized, and everyone we worked with was no longer involved with the project. The project was dead. They called everyone in our company into one large room and told us they had to shut down, and we had to get our personal stuff and be out in an hour. But the after party in a nearby bar was epic that night. Next story. I watched Denise Williams, who masterminded her Tallahassee husband's murder, get arrested and taken out of the building in handcuffs and into the police car. We worked at the same university, and it was right out my window. The doc is on Hulu, Mr. and Mrs. Murder. Next story. On my first day at a new job, I'm working at my desk and hear a coworker say to another from the back of the room, "I will mess you up." Dude was fired and escorted off the property within an hour. Next story. A coworker at a grocery store I used to work at went into the manager's office. I don't know what it was about, but I believe he was getting written up over something. A few minutes later, he burst out screaming at manager, "Damn you! I got a kid to feed and you gonna treat me like this? Suck it!" All in front of a store full of customers. At that point, the manager and the GM were chasing after him, telling him, "Out now!" He then had to come back in to get his car keys, after which he was told to leave in the back. Next story, me. After an all-hands meeting during which my abusive boss told me that support staff had an issue because I didn't say good morning back to them, I packed my office and walked out without notice on a Friday afternoon. Not my finest moment, but no regrets either. Next story. Picked up a second job as a delivery driver for Iceland, UK supermarket. One night, dispatch sends me on a route to the opposite side of town. Because of traffic, driving back would have taken over an hour past my scheduled finish time. So I call my manager and ask, "Hey, how do I claim the overtime for this?" Manager, "We don't pay overtime." Me, "All right then. When my shift ends, I'm parking the van up and walking back to my car. If you're not paying me, you're not getting me to sit in traffic for an extra hour." Manager, doubling down, "Like I said, we don't pay overtime." Cool. Not my problem. End of shift rolls around. Instead of wasting an hour crawling back in traffic, I park the van up neatly, tuck the keys under the driver's seat, and stroll off. 10 minutes later, I walk through the front entrance of the store like nothing happened. Manager nearly faints. "Where's the van?" Me, "Exactly where I left it. Keys are under the seat. My contract says X hours, I worked X hours. The second you stop paying me, my obligations stop too." The look on their face was absolutely priceless. Next story. It concerns me and it's recent. My former employer did not validate my trial period, simply because I was not licking my boots as rigorously as expected. But they tried to accuse me of bogus things, even though my main mission was accomplished. I obtained an important commercial certificate. The real reason was obvious, since I was summoned at the very moment I sent the report by email to the auditor. They were just waiting for me to send the report to release me. The next day, after being told that I would not be kept, the assistant director, a notable incompetent and false ass, ordered me to go and get an approval. The boxes of products weighed 20 kilograms. I just said, no, I wouldn't go. The tone rose, since he really wanted to have the sadistic pleasure of seeing me perform, just to take full advantage of my skills until the end before my departure. But I held my head high and didn't give a damn. A colleague looked at me with respect and said, "Okay." Another colleague made the gesture of taking off his hat, rolling out the red carpet. Next story, I worked at a medical clinic where we had to follow very strict rules, but management thought they could do whatever they wanted, up to and including fraud. I was going to get fired for insubordination anyway, but quit before they could. Their biggest mistake was having me do an exit interview, during which I laid out every illegal and immoral thing that was going on, horrible patient care, the aforementioned fraud. Then I told the HR person about the love triangle, square, that was going on between two managers, a tech, and a desk clerk. My exit interview got 3 people fired that week. Next story. I started to get up and walk out of a firing when the manager said, "I'm not done speaking." I tossed my name badge into his face and said I was already done and over. Later I found out a report I'd made lead to his arrest, and several others, and a legal investigation, so the whole exit was mildly amusing for a time. There were several other people in the report at the same time, so it was a group effort reporting this place and staff, not just a singular report taking it down. When I was 18, the Petco I worked for hired an assistant manager from a next-door company in the strip mall we shared space in. Long story short, we'd received many notices this guy was a constant drunk problem waiting to happen. One morning I got scheduled opening alone with him, when we should have had another employee. One around the sales floor, one on register. Register was supposed to be covered 100%, so he exploded on me when I wasn't going from the register to the sales floor to help someone because I was in the middle of cashing someone out already and had customers in line waiting. This involved him drunkenly shambling toward me. He was about 100 pounds bigger than me and came to work sloshed, and throwing a calendar display, about 5 feet tall rotating display pretty big, at me while I stood at the register. I backed up, took my company shirt off. I wore a tank top underneath, and threw it in his face, then walked out. The general manager asked if I wanted my job back later, but I declined. In retrospect, I should taken it and pushed for the drunken guy to get fired by corporate, but I didn't think that far advanced back then. He was eventually dumped for his behavior. Next story. Not long out of college, I was temping while job hunting. I was sent to a site and spent a couple of hours on a task assigned to me by the staff person who was there. 2 hours in, a boss came in. He threw some sort of tantrum, this was a long time ago, attacking me and the person who had directed me, saying, "I didn't okay this, what are you doing? I won't have this," etc., etc. I said, "You didn't want me to do this work?" And he blustered some more. I reached for the computer, erased everything I'd done in the last 2 hours, walked out, found a payphone, this was before we had cell phone, and called the temp agency. She gave me kudos for destroying my work and said I would be paid. Next story. I worked at a call center. This girl transferred this call to me that sounded like a family of gators. She just couldn't handle it. Long story short, after hearing the rest of the call, I had it on speaker, she just dropped face down on the floor. Just laid there, motionless. Kept slowly hitting her head on the floor. Everyone around laughed. We all assumed she was being overly dramatic for effect. When she got up, she was actually crying. Kept saying nope, noped her way all the way off the floor and to her car. I saw she posted one word on Facebook later that day. Nope. Found out a few days later that she quit. Next story, saw a guy at a warehouse job get fired mid-shift. He climbed onto the forklift, cranked the horn non-stop and yelled, "Good luck moving pallets without me," before security dragged him out. Another one, coworker in retail quit on Black Friday, tossed the headset in the trash, told a line of 50 customers, "Good luck," and just walked out. Store manager chased after him and tripped into a clothing rack. The best ones aren't planned. They're pure chaos in the moment. Next story. One time at a law office I worked at, there were a bunch of people who all called out like 7 in total. They had been rehired by my company at a significantly lower wage than they earned previously. I had to come in on my first day off to cover all of them, but I was proud of them for standing up for themselves. They wound up getting a raise.